Continuing our story, Absalom has overthrown David without even a fight. David just vacates his royal city, goes on the run with his family and with his closest friends and warriors. Absalom comes into the city, begins to take control. We're going to see the conflict as it takes place and unfolds. Chapter 16. When David had gone a short distance beyond the summit, there was Ziba, the steward of Mephibosheth, waiting to meet him. He had a string of donkeys saddled and loaded with 200 loaves of bread, 100 cakes of raisins, 100 cakes of figs, and skins of wine. The king asked Ziba, "Why have you brought these?" Ziba answered, "The donkeys are for the king's household to ride on, the bread and fruit are for the men to eat, and the wine is to refresh those who became exhausted in the wilderness." The king then asked, "Where is your master's grandson?" Ziba said to him, "He is staying in Jerusalem because he thinks today the Israelites will restore to me my grandfather's kingdom." Then the king said to Ziba, "All that belonged to Mephibosheth is now yours." "I humbly bow," Ziba said. "May I find favor in your eyes, my lord the king." Verse 5. As King David approached Bahurim, a man from the same clan as Saul's family came out from there. His name was Shimei, son of Gera, and he cursed as he came out. He pelted David and all the king's officials with stones. Through all the troops and the special guard were on David's right and left. Basically, he started throwing rocks at David. He started saying names at David. He started talking bad to David. He said, get out, you murderer, you scoundrel. The Lord has repaid you for all the blood you shed in the household of Saul, in whose place you have reigned. The Lord has given the kingdom into the hands of your son Absalom. You have come to ruin because you are a murderer." Then Abishai, son of Zeruiah, said to the king, "Why should this dead dog curse my lord the king? Let me go over and cut off his head." Basically, David's standing there with hundreds of warriors, and for some reason this guy thinks it's a good idea to throw rocks at the kings and curse at him as if they're not going to strike back. And so Abishai, one of his mighty men, says, "You want me to go put this dude down? I can take care of this in a couple seconds, king. Just let me know." Verse 10, but the king said, "What does this have to do with you, your sons of Zeruiah? If he is cursing because the Lord said to him, 'Curse David,' who can ask, 'Why do you do this?'" David then said to Abishai and all his officials, "My son, my own flesh and blood, is trying to kill me. How much more than this Benjamite? Leave him alone. Let him curse, for the Lord has told him to. It may be that the Lord will look upon my misery and restore to me his covenant blessing instead of this curse today." So David and his men continued along the road, while Shimei was going along the hillside opposite him, cursing him as he went and throwing stones at him and showering him with dirt. The king and all the people with him arrived at their destination exhausted, and there he refreshed himself. Verse 15. Meanwhile, Absalom and all the men of Israel came to Jerusalem, and Ahithophel was with him. This was the one that David had prayed that his wisdom would become foolishness. And then Hushai the Archite, David's confidant, went to Absalom and said to him, "Long live the king, long live the king." This was the spy, David's friend, the spy that David sent to hear from Absalom. Absalom said to Hushai, "So this is your love you show your friend? If he's your friend, why didn't you go with him?" Hushai said to Absalom, "No, the one chosen by the Lord, by these people, and by all the men of Israel, his I will be, and I will remain with him. Furthermore, whom should I serve? Should I not serve the son, just as I served your father? So I will serve you." Absalom said to Ahithophel, "Give us your advice. What shall we do?" Ahithophel answered, "Sleep with your father's concubines, whom you left to take care of the palace. Then all Israel will hear that you have made yourself obnoxious to your father, and the hands of everyone with you will be more resolute." So they pitched a tent for Absalom on the roof, and he slept with his father's concubines in the sight of all Israel. Essentially, this is fulfilling what God had prophesied earlier when David messed up with Bathsheba, that what you did in secret will be declared from the rooftops, so to speak. He talked about how there would be conflict in his family. He talked about how there would be violence in his family. Basically, God foretold that this would take place. Now, in these days, the advice Ahithophel gave was like that of one who inquires of God. That was how both David and Absalom regarded all of Ahithophel's advice. Basically, this guy was really wise. He was really smart. He didn't give bad counsel. But again, I remind you, David had prayed that God would, in essence, strike him dumb and that he would give bad counsel to his son Absalom, who had rebelled against him. Chapter 17. Ahithophel said to Absalom, "I would choose 12,000 men and set out tonight in pursuit of David. I would attack him while he is weary and weak. I would strike him with terror, and then all the people with him will flee. I would strike down only the king and bring all the people back to you. The death of the man you seek will mean the return of all. All the people will be unharmed." This plan seemed good to Absalom and to all the elders of Israel. But Absalom said, "Summon also Hushai the Archite, so we can hear what he has to say as well." When Hushai came to him, Absalom said, "Ahithophel has given this advice. Should we do what he says? If If not, give us your opinion. Basically, he was getting a second opinion. He heard what Ahithophel said, and he was like, Hushai, what do you think? Give me an idea. Hushai replied to Absalom, the advice Ahithophel has given is not good this time. You know your father and his men, they're fighters and as fierce as a wild bear robbed of her cubs. Besides, your father is an experienced fighter. He will not spend the night with the troops. Even now he is hidden in a cave or some other place. If he should attack your troops first, whoever hears about it will say, there has been a slaughter among the troops who follow Absalom. Then even the bravest soldier, whose heart is like the heart of a lion, will melt with fear. For all Israel knows that your father is a fighter and that those with him are brave. Basically, this is what he's saying in a nice way. Absalom, you're a pretty boy, little Fabio type. You got the long hair. You've got the perfect body. You look really handsome. Your dad, he's like a cage fighting warrior. He's hidden in caves. He's been in the wilderness. He's fought in many battles against the Philistines. If there's one thing that people know about David, that man can fight. He says you need to be really careful because this first battle will define you. If you lose this first battle, people will think you're going to lose the war and people might lose heart. He gives basically a 100% counter opinion to Ahithophel. So I advise you, let all Israel from Dan to Beersheba, as numerous as the sand of the sea, be gathered to you, with yourself leading them into battle. Then we will attack him wherever he may be found, and we will fall on him as dew settles on the ground. Neither he nor any of his men will be left alive. If he withdraws into a city, then all Israel will bring ropes to that city, and we will drag it to the valley, until not so much as a pebble is left. Absalom and all the men of Israel said, the advice of Hushai the Archite is better than that of Ahithophel, for the Lord had determined to frustrate the good advice of Ahithophel in order to bring disaster on Absalom. Hushai told Zadok and Abiathar the priest, Ahithophel has advised Absalom and the elders of Israel to do such and such, but I advise him to do so and so. Now send a message at once and tell David, do not spend the night at the fords in the wilderness. Cross over without fail, or the king and all the people with him will be swallowed up. Jonathan and Ahimaaz were staying at En-Rogel. A female servant was to go and inform them, and they were to go and tell the King David, for they could not risk being seen entering the city. But a young man saw them and told Absalom. So the two of them left at once and went to the house of a man in Bahurim. He had a well in his courtyard, and they climbed down into it. His wife took a covering and spread it out over the opening of the well and scattered grain over it, so no one knew anything about it. When Absalom's men came to the women at the house, they asked, where are Ahimaaz and Jonathan? The women answered them, they crossed over the brook. The men searched but found no one, so they returned to Jerusalem. After they had gone, the two climbed out of the well and went to inform King David. They said to him, set out and cross the river at once. Ahithophel has advised such and such against you. So David and all the people with him set out and crossed the Jordan. By daybreak, no one was left who had not crossed the Jordan. Basically, David is going further and further away. He is following the advice of his friend Hushai, as God is really frustrating the counsel of Ahithophel. When Ahithophel saw that his advice had not been followed, he saddled his donkey, set out for his house in his hometown. He put his house in order and then hanged himself. So he died and was buried in his father's tomb. So when he realized that the new king didn't listen to his counsel, he took his own life. Kind of a crazy turn of events. Really, nothing more is said about Ahithophel, and that is the end of his existence in the story. He had been one who was so wise. He had been one who had given such great counsel, but he rebelled against David and was a part of the rebellion with Absalom, and God turned his wisdom into foolishness, and he took his own life. Verse 24, David went to Mahanaim, and Absalom crossed the Jordan with all the men of Israel. Absalom had appointed Amasa over the army in place of Joab. Amasa was the son of Jether, an Ishmaelite who had married Abigail, the daughter of Nahash, and sister of Zeruiah, the mother of Joab. The Israelites and Absalom camped in the land of Gilead. Basically, they're about to go into battle. When David came to Mahanaim, Shobi, son of Nahash from Rabbah of the Ammonites, and Machir, son of Amiel from Lodabar, and Barzillai, and the Gileadite from Rogelim, brought bedding and bowls and articles of pottery. They also brought wheat and barley flour, roasted grain, beans, lentils, honey, curd, sheep, cheese from cow's milk for David and his people. Basically, they brought food to eat. For they said the people had become exhausted and hungry and thirsty in the wilderness. Chapter 18, we're about to learn about the death of Absalom. David mustered the men who were with him and appointed over them commanders of thousands, commanders of hundreds. David sent out his troops, a third under the command of Joab, a third under Joab's brother Abishai, son of Zeruiah, and a third under Ittai the Gittite. The king told the troops, I myself will surely march out with you. But the men told him, they said, no, They said, this isn't a good idea. You must not go out. If we're forced to flee, they won't care about us. Even if half of us die, they won't care. But you are worth 10,000 of us. Basically, they said, they're only after you. So we don't want to send you out. If they know where you are, they will send every soldier they have after you, David. If they can cut off your head, the war's over. The king answered, I will do whatever seems best to you. So the king stood beside the gate with all his men, marched out in units of hundreds and of thousands. The king commanded Joab, Abishai, and Ittai, be gentle with the young man Absalom for my sake. And all the troops heard the king giving orders concerning Absalom to each of his commanders. This again goes back to David's challenges in his leadership with his own kids. I don't know why. His son has murdered another son. His son has overthrown his kingdom. His son has turned the people against him. I mean, straight up, Absalom just needs to be put to death. But David still gives this order. Just be gentle with him. Just use kid gloves with him. David struggled with teaching his children consequences for their actions. He gives this order. This order will not be followed. Joab is going to go into battle, and he is going to put Absalom to death in battle so that he's no longer a problem in the future. It says that David's army marched out of the city to fight Israel, and the battle took place in the forest of Ephraim. There Israel's troops were routed by David's men, and the casualties that day were great, 20,000 men. The battle spread out over the whole countryside, and the forest swallowed up more men that day than the sword. Now Absalom happened to meet David's men. He was riding his mule, and the mule went under the thick branch of a large oak, and Absalom's hair got caught in the tree. Basically, as he was riding, his hair was blowing in the wind, and his hair was so long. You remember when he cut it every year, it was like 5 pounds the weight. His hair got caught in the oak tree as he was riding. It probably yanked his neck back, and he was there tangled in the tree by his own hair. Joab heard about this. It says when one of the men saw what happened, he told Joab, I just saw Absalom hanging in an oak tree. So he's hanging in a tree by his own hair. Joab said to the man who told him this, what, you saw him? Why didn't you strike into the ground right there? I would have given you 10 shekels of silver and a warrior's belt. Basically, he says, you wimp, why didn't you kill this dude? This is our enemy. Verse 12, but the man replied, even if 1,000 shekels were weighed out into my hands, I would not lay a hand on the king's son. Basically, everyone was afraid to touch the king's son because they knew that the king wanted him dealt gently with. Joab, he didn't care. In our hearing, the king's commanded you and Abishai and Ittai, protect the young man Absalom for my sake. And if I had put my life in jeopardy and nothing is hidden from the king, you would have kept your distance from me. Joab said, I'm not going to wait like this for you. So he took 3 javelins in his hand and he plunged them into Absalom's heart while Absalom was still hanging there in the tree. And 10 of Joab's armor bearers surrounded Absalom and struck and killed him. Then Joab sounded the trumpet and the troops stopped pursuing Israel, for Joab halted them. They took Absalom, threw him into a pit in the forest, and piled up rocks on top of him. Meanwhile, all the Israelites ran back to their houses. During his lifetime, Absalom had taken a pillar and erected it in the king's valley as a monument to himself, for he thought, I have no son to carry on the memory of my name. He named the pillar after himself, and it is called Absalom's monument to this day. Basically, he was so prideful, he made a statue of himself so everyone could look at it. Verse 19, and we'll close in these last few verses. Now Ahimaaz, son of Zadok, said, let me run and take the news to the king of the Lord. To the king that the Lord has vindicated him by delivering him from the hand of his enemies. You are not the one to take the news today, Joab told him. You may take the news another time, but you must not do so today, because the king's son is dead. This is not good news. David's not going to take this well. Then Joab said to a Cushite, go tell the king what you have seen. The Cushite bowed down before Joab and ran off. Ahimaaz, son of Zadok, again said to Joab, come what may, please let me run behind the Cushite. But Joab replied, my son, why do you want to go? You don't have any news that will bring you a reward. He said, come what you may, I want to run. So Joab said, fine, dude, go run. Go talk to the king. Then Ahimaaz ran by the way of the plain and outran the Cushite. While David was sitting between the inner and outer gates, the watchman went up the roof of the gateway by the wall. As he looked out, he saw a man running alone. The watchman called out to the king and reported it. The king said, if he is alone, he must have good news. And the runner came closer and closer. Then the watchman saw another runner, and he called to the gatekeeper, look, another man running alone. The king said, he must bring in good news too. The king said to the watchman, he said, basically, he's like, hey, what's going on? And the watchman says, it seems to me the first one that's running looks like Ahimaaz, son of Zadok. He's a good man, the king said. He must come with good news. Verse 28, then Ahimaaz called out to the king, all is well. He bowed down before the king with his face to the ground and said, praise be the Lord your God. He has delivered up those who lifted their hands against my lord the king. The king asked, is the young man Absalom safe? So basically, David is told, God has defeated your enemies. God has defended you and preserved you. This is great news. We should be rejoicing. All David asks is Absalom okay? Think of how his soldiers, think of how his men are processing this. They've all risked their lives for him, and David's like, is my rebellious son okay? Ahimaaz answered, I saw great confusion, just as Joab was about to send the king's servant and me, your servant, but I don't know what it was. The king said, stand aside and wait here. So he stepped aside and stood there. Then the Cushite arrived and said, my lord the king, hear the good news. The Lord has vindicated you today by delivering you from the hand of all those who rose up against you. The king asked the Cushite, is the young man Absalom safe? The Cushite replied, may the enemies of my lord the king and all who rise up to harm you be like that young man. Basically, he said he's dead. The king was shaken. He went up to the room over the gateway and wept. And as he wept, he said, oh, my son Absalom, my son, Absalom, if only I had died instead of you. Oh, Absalom, my son, my son. In our next video, we're going to pick off where David is corrected by Joab for really a lack of wisdom. He's weeping over his rebellious son who died because of his actions, who died because of his wickedness. And all the men that risked their lives to preserve David see David saying, I wish I would have died instead of Absalom. Imagine how disheartening that would have been to watch your leader, who you risked your life for, who you risked everything for, to be upset that you survived, to have wished that you died, that Absalom might live. Some tension's going to build. We'll learn about it in chapter 19. Be blessed.